The bullet that grazed Seung-woo's temple left a heat signature across his cheekbone like a brand. The alley behind the Koreatown karaoke bars smelled of ozone, soju, and the copper promise of execution. 7 silencers tracked his movement through the steam rising from a sidewalk grate, red laser dots painting constellations across his chest. His bodyguards were already cooling in the gutter, their blood mixing with the night's earlier rain. He tugged his silk cuffs straight with the same methodical precision he'd used to eliminate rivals for a decade, accepting death the way he'd accepted every other cost of power. The Gumrangong dragon tattoo coiled up his throat, its scales seeming to pulse in the strobe of a nearby club's neon sign bleeding through the dark. Then the whine of an electric motor cut through the distant bass, and everything fractured. Rachel Harris skidded her delivery bike into the mouth of the alley, thermal bag bouncing against her spine. 26 years old, athletic frame hidden under a grease-stained company jacket with reflective tape peeling at the seams, box braids pulled into a functional bun that screamed 3rd shift, 4th delivery, 0 tips. Her face carried the hollow-eyed exhaustion of someone running from rent, not running toward anything. The 7 assassins didn't even track her movement. Just another piece of urban debris. A worker ant who'd taken a wrong turn in the colony. Closed street, one muttered in Korean, not bothering to aim his weapon away from Seung-woo. They had no concept of what stood in the delivery uniform. Seung-woo's eyes found hers for a heartbeat. Cold, calculated, already dead behind the pupils. The gaze of a man who'd stopped praying to anything but probability. The lead assassin, a man built like a commercial freezer, with Sangyong crew ink crawling up his shaved skull, flicked his gun barrel toward the street. "Turn around, sweetheart. You didn't see anything here." Rachel said nothing. Her dark amber eyes made a circuit of the alley with the efficiency of a surgeon planning an incision. Weapon positions, injury assessment, Seung-woo favored his left ribs, exit angles, the way the second gunman's stance suggested a torn ACL. One of them, irritated by her continued presence, stepped forward and kicked her bike hard. The thermal delivery bag hit the asphalt with the wet thud of meat hitting a butcher's block. Everything stopped. Rachel didn't gasp, didn't stumble back. She just exhaled slow, controlled, the kind of breath you take before a long-delayed decision becomes inevitable. 14 months of pretending drained out of her lungs. Then she turned to face the man who'd kicked her bike, and something behind her eyes shifted from minimum wage to maximum violence. The first assassin never saw her move. One moment she was just another exploited gig worker. The next, her boot was cutting through the humid air in a perfect axe kick that descended on the junction of his neck and collarbone with the precision of a guillotine blade finding the gap between vertebrae. Rachel's studio apartment was the kind of place people disappeared into by design. 4th floor walk-up in a building where the landlord accepted cash and didn't ask questions, where the hallway smelled like kimchi and someone else's bad decisions. She'd made it 3 steps inside before she felt the shift in air pressure that meant she wasn't alone. Seung-woo sat in her single folding chair like it was a throne, the glow from her ancient laptop casting shadows across the fresh bandages wrapped around his ribs. He'd removed his ruined suit jacket. The dragon tattoo seemed to breathe in the blue light. "You have good instincts," he said in English, his accent precise and expensive. "But you left a trail. 3 traffic cameras, 2 ATM feeds, and a very memorable exit from my alley." Rachel's hand had already moved to the knife taped behind her cheap IKEA nightstand, but she forced herself still. Running now meant burning another identity she couldn't afford to build. "You should be in a hospital." "I own the hospital. I also own the morgue where your 7 admirers are currently being catalogued as gang violence casualties." He lifted a tablet from his lap with the careful movement of a man negotiating broken ribs. "What I don't own is an explanation for Asset 404. The designation hit her like a fist to the solar plexus. Rachel's face remained blank, but Seung-woo smiled a predator's expression that held no warmth. The Chimera Protocol, defunct as of 14 months ago, officially. A ghost program that turned unwanted children into biological weapons. You were the success story they couldn't afford to keep. The tablet screen showed her life in redacted blocks. Her face at 12, eyes already dead. her face at 16, covered in electrodes. Test results that reduced her humanity to data points and kill percentages. Where did you get that? Her voice came out flat, tactical. I buy secrets the way other men buy art. It's expensive but appreciating in value, especially now that someone is very eager to find you. He tapped the screen. Your former handlers have a 7-figure bounty. Dead or alive, though they prefer alive. Something about unfinished neural mapping. Rachel's jaw tightened. She'd spent 14 months delivering pad thai and egg rolls to forget the sensation of a laboratory restraint system. What do you want? I want whoever tried to kill me tonight. Someone in my organization sold me out, and I need a shadow with no loyalty to my world and no reason to betray me. He set the tablet down carefully. 1 month. You guard my life, help me identify the traitor, and I give you something better than minimum wage and a fake social security number. I give you a new face, new papers, and a banker in Singapore who specializes in people who need to vanish properly. And if I refuse? Seung-woo is using fear to control her, acting just like the people she ran from. If you hate bullies who force people into corners just because they have power, hit that subscribe button right now. Let's show them we don't stand for coercion. His smile never wavered. Then this file uploads to 6 different intelligence networks before sunrise. You'll have 3 countries and 2 private military contractors hunting you by Monday. Rachel stared at the man who'd just turned her life into leverage and recognized the truth she'd been running from. Freedom was always conditional, and she'd just run out of rent. The Jiangmi headquarters occupied the top 3 floors of a glass tower in downtown LA that legitimate businessmen called impressive and federal prosecutors called suspicious. Seung-woo's tailor had worked fast 12 hours from measurement to delivery. Rachel stood in the private elevator wearing a black Alexander Wang blazer cut to conceal the Glock 19 at her spine, tailored slacks that allowed full range of motion, and Ferragamo boots with reinforced toes that could break bones as efficiently as any steel-toed work boot. Her box braids fell loose now, styled in a way that cost more than her former monthly rent. The delivery girl was gone. In her place stood something that made the 2 guards flanking the elevator exchange nervous glances. The penthouse opened into a space designed to intimidate. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the city like a conquered kingdom. 20 men sat around an ebony conference table that probably cost more than most cars, all of them wearing $1,000 suits and expressions carved from skepticism. Their eyes tracked Rachel's entrance with the predatory calculation of sharks evaluating unfamiliar prey. Seung-woo sat at the head of the table, his collar perfectly arranged to display just enough of his neck tattoo to remind everyone what he was. Gentlemen, meet Rachel Harris, my new head of personal security. The silence had teeth. Park Ji-hoon, Seung-woo's oldest lieutenant, leaned back with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. With respect, boss, we don't know her. She has no history with our organization, no family ties, no... She saved my life, Seung-woo said simply, while my trusted security detail was bleeding out in the street. Rachel didn't wait for permission. She moved along the perimeter of the room, her gaze traveling across faces with clinical efficiency, not looking at hands or waistlines where weapons hide, but at the micro-expressions that training can't fully erase. The slight dilation of pupils, the involuntary jaw clench, the way someone's breathing changed when a predator entered their space. She stopped behind a younger man, mid-30s, expensive watch. You're carrying a 380 inches in ankle holster, right leg. You adjusted it twice since I walked in. She moved on before he could respond. You. She nodded to another. Keep looking at the exit behind Seung-woo, not with concern with measurement. You've walked that distance in your head at least 4 times. Park's smile had calcified. Observant, but reading a room isn't the same as... You're terrified, Rachel said quietly, stopping directly across from him. Your pulse is visible in your carotid. Your left hand keeps drifting toward your phone like it's a lifeline. And you haven't made eye contact with Seung-woo once since I identified the exit watcher, which means you're either complicit or compromised. The room temperature dropped 10 degrees. Park's face went through 3 expressions in 2 seconds. Shock, rage, then careful neutrality. This is insulting. I've served this organization for 15 years, Seung-woo said softly, which is why you'll forgive my new employee's thoroughness. Rachel, continue. She did. By the time she'd circled the room, she'd identified 2 men with fresh bruising hidden under makeup, one who smelled like he'd been in a chemical fire recently, and 3 whose body language suggested they were taking orders from someone who wasn't Seung-woo. The king watched his court realize they'd been dissected, and smiled. Any other concerns about Miss Harris's qualifications? No one spoke. Rachel stood behind Seung-woo's chair, a shadow that saw everything and waited for someone to make the next mistake. The Mercedes S-Class sat in the underground parking garage like a panther at rest, all black curves and bulletproof glass. Seung-woo's hand was 6 inches from the door handle when Rachel's arm shot across his chest with enough force to drive him backward into a concrete pillar. Don't. Her voice carried the flat certainty of someone who'd disarmed explosives before she could legally drink. She moved to the vehicle in a crouch, her fingers tracing the undercarriage without touching. Her head tilted, listening to something only she could hear, the almost imperceptible electronic hum of a timer counting down beneath the engine block. C4. Mercury switch back up. You open that door, we have maybe 4 seconds before this whole level becomes a crematorium. Seung-woo's security team materialized from 3 directions, weapons drawn, but Rachel was already stripping wires from the building's electrical conduit with her bare hands. She worked with the mechanical precision of someone whose muscle memory had been programmed by people who measured failure in body counts. 2 minutes later, she emerged from under the chassis holding a block of military-grade plastic explosive and a detonator still blinking its patient red countdown. Safe house, Seung-woo said quietly. Now, the safe house was a converted loft in Arts District, the kind of space that appeared on no property records and had 3 separate exit routes. Rachel cleared it in 90 seconds while Seung-woo poured 2 glasses of whiskey with hands that had finally started to shake. Adrenaline debt coming due. She emerged from the bathroom in a tank top, her blazer discarded, finally allowing herself to acknowledge the pain from where she'd scraped her shoulder under the car. That's when Seung-woo saw her back. The scars formed a topographical map of institutional cruelty. Surgical incisions in perfect parallel lines where they'd implanted neural interfaces. Burn marks from electrodes. The puckered tissue of repeated injections that had rewritten her nervous system at the cellular level. Each mark was a data point in someone's research paper, a line item in a budget justified by national security. The people who did this to Rachel treated her like a lab rat, not a human. If you believe everyone deserves respect and bodily autonomy, comment "I stand for justice" below. Don't let the villains win. Rachel caught him staring in the reflection of a darkened window. She didn't flinch or cover herself. Shame required believing you'd been wronged, and they'd trained that out of her by age 13. Seung-woo set down his glass and turned, slowly unbuttoning his collar. The dragon tattoo continued down across his chest and shoulders, but underneath the artistry were older marks. Cigarette burns in constellation patterns. The white lines of knife work from his initiation at 16. The brand they'd pressed into his ribs to prove he could endure pain without screaming. They told me suffering made me strong, he said quietly. That the pain was an investment in who I'd become. Rachel's fingers moved unconsciously to the largest scar on her shoulder blade. The one where they'd installed the kill switch before they realized she'd found a way to disable it. They told me I should be grateful. That I'd been chosen. We were children. We were products. They stood in the silence of mutual recognition. 2 people who'd been carved into weapons by institutions that measured success in control and compliance. The whiskey sat untouched. Outside, the city hummed with people who'd never been branded, who'd never had their humanity itemized and filed under classified. Seung-woo's hand moved to his neck tattoo, covering the dragon that covered the scars. I can't give you back what they took. No one can, Rachel said. But you can help me make sure they never take anything again. The shipment was supposed to be pharmaceutical-grade opioids routed through a Jungmi front company in Long Beach standard operation, predictable profit margins. The kind of transactions Seung-woo's organization had executed 200 times without incident. Rachel insisted on being there anyway, her instincts screaming that predictable was exactly when people got killed. The warehouse sat between the port and the refineries, all corrugated steel and sodium lights that turned everything the color of old bones. Sungwoo's men cut the container lock at 2 a.m., while Rachel maintained overwatch from a catwalk, her eyes tracking heat signatures through a thermal monocular that cost more than her former annual income. The first crate opened with the pneumatic hiss of a pressurized SEAL medical transport, temperature-controlled, the kind of packaging that kept biologicals viable across continents. But instead of the expected pharmaceutical bottles, the foam interior cradled rows of vials filled with liquid the color of antifreeze, each one labeled with alphanumeric codes that made Rachel's blood crystallize in her veins. She was moving before conscious thought caught up, boots hammering down the metal stairs. "Nobody touch anything. Get back from that container now." Sungwoo turned at the command in her voice, watching her approach the crate like it contained a live grenade. Her hands moved across the labels with the careful precision of someone reading her own death certificate. CP7, Chimera Protocol, 7th Generation Neural Enhancement Serum. Her voice came out flat, clinical, the tone of someone reciting trauma in a therapist's office. "They were on CP4 when I escaped. This is 3 iterations past what they used on us." "Us?" Seung-woo stepped beside her, reading the shipping manifest that accompanied the vials. The destination addresses were medical research facilities that didn't exist, routed through shell companies he recognized as Jiangmi subsidiaries, his own infrastructure weaponized against him. Rachel's finger traced the production date. This was manufactured 6 weeks ago. Chimera was supposed to be defunct. She looked up, and Seung-woo saw something close to fear flicker behind her carefully maintained control. "If they're making this, they're planning to make more of me. Children who won't know how to run." The math assembled itself in Seung-woo's mind with the brutal clarity of a hostile takeover. His distribution networks, his protection from law enforcement, his liquid capital, all of it being siphoned to fund a ghost program that turned children into biological weapons. Someone inside his organization was selling him out to finance the very system that had destroyed Rachel. He pulled out his phone and made 3 calls. The first to his accountant, demanding a complete audit of the last 6 months. The second to his technology specialist, ordering a trace on every Jiangmi transaction involving medical supplies. The third to his most loyal lieutenant, the one man he trusted beyond blood. Park Ji-hoon answered on the second ring, his voice carrying the false warmth of a snake in tall grass. "Boss, it's late. Everything okay?" Sung-woo stared at the vials that represented someone's empire being built inside his own, and understood betrayal with perfect clarity. "We need to talk about your investment portfolio, Park. Specifically the medical research dividends." The line went silent for 3 seconds too long. Then Park laughed, and the sound carried no humor at all. "I'll see you in the morning, boss." The call disconnected. Rachel met Seung-woo's eyes across the container of liquid nightmares, and they both knew the morning would bring war. The digital forensics came back at dawn, delivered by Seung-woo's technology specialist in an encrypted file that unraveled 15 years of carefully constructed loyalty. Park Ji-hoon wasn't the traitor. The snake had a different name. Kang Min-jae, Seung-woo's second lieutenant, the man who'd stood beside him during 3 territory wars and countless federal investigations. The man Seung-woo had called brother. Rachel spread the evidence across the safehouse table like an autopsy report. Bank transfers routed through cryptocurrency exchanges in Singapore. Encrypted communications with a handler identified only as Shepard, Rachel's former commanding officer at Chimera Protocol. Meeting logs that showed Kang had been selling Jiangmi infrastructure for 18 months, long before the assassination attempt. Every drug route, every protection racket, every piece of the empire Seung-woo had built with blood and strategy, systematically cataloged and sold to a government program that measured success in subjects controlled and weapons deployed. "He's been patient," Rachel said, her finger tracing the timeline. "Small percentages at first. Shipments redirected, accounts skimmed just below audit thresholds. He's good." "He was good," Seung-woo corrected, his voice carrying the cold precision of a man calculating exactly how someone would die. "I taught him to think 3 moves ahead. I gave him territory when he proved himself. I trusted him with operational security. The communication logs told the real story. Kang's messages to Shepard dripped with resentment that had festered for years. Sungwoo and his code like "we're samurai" instead of criminals. Could have doubled our profit margins if he'd just let me move the fentanyl through the school districts. But no, he has principles. Another message, more recent. The government's offering 8 figures for stable distribution networks. Why should I settle for his table scraps when I can buy my own empire? Kang is willing to sell out his own brother for a paycheck. If you despise traitors who stab their family in the back for money, smash that like button. Let's see how many loyal people we have in the chat. Rachel watched Sungwoo's face calcify into something ancient and absolutely merciless. She'd seen that expression before, in the mirror, the moment she'd realized her handlers viewed her as equipment rather than human. He thinks honor is weakness, Sungwoo said quietly. He thinks I'm sentimental because I won't traffic through elementary schools or sell weapons to domestic terrorists. He doesn't understand that the code isn't morality, it's sustainability. You can't build an empire on bodies that attract federal task forces. He doesn't want an empire, Rachel said, pulling up the final document, a contract between Kang and Chimera Protocol. He wants a retirement fund. They're offering him $40 million and witness protection in exchange for complete access to your networks. He sells you out, testifies if needed, and disappears into suburban anonymity while they use your infrastructure to traffic children into black site laboratories. Sungwoo's hand moved to his neck tattoo, covering the dragon that symbolized everything Kang had decided was worthless. When's the handoff? Rachel checked the encrypted calendar. Tomorrow night. Port of Long Beach. Container Terminal J. Kang delivers the final access codes. They transfer the money, and your organization becomes a subsidiary of a program that turns kids into weapons. Then we have 1 day to prepare. Sungwoo stood, his shadow stretching across the evidence of betrayal. Tomorrow night, Kang learns why honor isn't weakness. It's knowing exactly how far you'll go when someone crosses the line. Kang's message arrived at noon, a text that radiated false contrition through every carefully chosen word. Boss, we need to talk. I know you've been asking questions. Let me explain before this gets out of hand. Tonight, 9 p.m., Warehouse 7 at the port. Just us. I owe you that much. Rachel read it over Sungwoo's shoulder and felt every instinct she'd been programmed with start screaming. It's a kill box. He's had 18 months to prepare this conversation. The fact that he's inviting it now means he's ready to end it. I know. Sungwoo set the phone down with the careful precision of a man making peace with violence. Then we don't go. We hit him first, on our terms, at the actual handoff tomorrow. No. Sungwoo's voice carried the absolute finality of a man who'd already made his decision and counted the cost. He was my brother. Before he was a traitor, before the money, he stood with me when we had nothing but reputation and hunger. I need to look him in the eye and hear him say it. I need him to know I know. Rachel recognized the expression she'd worn it herself the day she'd confronted her handler, the woman who'd raised her from age 7. The woman who'd held her hand through the early surgeries and told her the pain meant she was special. The need to see betrayal acknowledged wasn't about closure. It was about refusing to let them rewrite history, to pretend the knife in your back was somehow an accident. Then we prepare for war, she said simply. They spent the afternoon turning themselves into a 2-person tactical unit. Rachel requisitioned equipment from Sungwoo's armory ceramic plate carriers worn under tailored clothing, weapons chosen for reliability over flash. She selected a suppressed MPX for herself, compact enough to conceal until needed. For Sungwoo, a Glock 34 with extended magazines and a backup, 380 inches and ankle holster. She walked him through contingencies with the clinical efficiency of someone who'd survived 100 ambushes. Warehouse 7 has 3 entrances. You go through the main, I enter via the roof access 15 minutes prior. Elevated position, overlapping fields of fire. If Kang's alone, I stay invisible. If he brought company, I start removing problems before you're in effective range. And if it's Chimera Protocol, then we find out how many operators they're willing to lose to get me back. Rachel loaded her magazines with the muscle memory of someone who'd been doing it since she was tall enough to reach the ammunition locker. They trained me to be expensive to kill. Let's make sure they remember that. Seung-woo watched her work, this woman who'd been weaponized by the same people now trying to weaponize his empire. If this goes wrong— It's already wrong, Rachel interrupted. We're just deciding how it ends. You want to look your brother in the eye? I'll make sure you live long enough to do it. They left for the port at 8 p.m., driving separate vehicles, taking different routes. Two people who'd been betrayed by systems they'd once trusted now walking willingly into a trap, because some truths required witnesses. The warehouse district rose against the night sky like a cathedral of rust and broken promises, and somewhere inside, Kang was waiting with whatever loyalty cost when you put it up for sale. Warehouse 7 smelled like salt corrosion and diesel fuel, vast enough that footsteps echoed like gunshots in a cathedral. Seung-woo entered through the main bay door at exactly 9 p.m., his shadow stretching long under the industrial floods that carved the space into zones of light and absolute darkness. Rachel had disappeared into the rafters 20 minutes earlier, a ghost with a rifle and 15 years of institutional rage waiting for a target. Kang stood in the center of the kill box, wearing a smile that had curdled into something predatory. He wasn't alone. 12 men in tactical gear formed a perimeter, their weapons held with the casual competence of private military contractors who measured success in body counts. And behind Kang, emerging from the shadows like a cancer-achieving form, stood a woman in her 50s with steel-gray hair and the dead eyes of someone who'd spent a career turning children into weapons. Rachel's former handler, Dr. Sarah Chen. Shepherd. Boss, Kang said, the word dripping false respect. I'm glad you came. Though I see you left your new pet at home. Seung-woo's hand stayed carefully away from his weapon, his posture relaxed despite the kill count surrounding him. You wanted to explain. Explain. It's simple economics. Kang gestured to the warehouse, to the empire beyond. You built something valuable, then refused to maximize its potential. The government pays better than street corners and neighborhood protection. Dr. Chen's organization needs infrastructure. I need capital. You were the obstacle. You sold me for 40 million, Seung-woo said quietly. After everything, you still think you're a king with a code. You're just a criminal with expensive suits and delusions about honor. Kang's smile widened. Dr. Chen, he's all yours, just like we agreed. Dr. Chen stepped forward, her tablet glowing with biometric data. Mr. Bay, you've been sheltering asset 404 for 2 weeks now. Before we conclude our business with Mr. Bay, Kang, I need that asset returned to federal custody. Where is she? The laser sight appeared on Dr. Chen's forehead like a scarlet kiss, Rachel's voice cutting through the warehouse from somewhere in the darkness above. Right here, Shepherd. Did you miss me? Everything detonated into violence. Rachel's first shot took the contractor nearest Dr. Chen through the temple before his nervous system registered threat. Her second and third dropped the men flanking Kang. Then she was moving through the rafters like smoke with a rifle, each muzzle flash from the suppressed MPX, marking another contractor learning that Asset 404 hadn't forgotten a single lesson they'd beaten into her. Seung-woo moved the moment. Chaos erupted, his Glock clearing leather as he dove behind a shipping container. Kang's men opened fire, automatic weapons turning the warehouse into a lightning storm of tracer rounds and ricochets. Rachel dropped from the rafters 20 feet onto a contractor's shoulders, her momentum driving him into concrete hard enough to crack bone. Then she was rolling, firing, moving with the fluid inevitability of a predator finally allowed off the leash. This wasn't the careful, controlled soldier they'd programmed. This was 15 years of suppressed violence finding targets that deserved it. She put 3 rounds through the knee of a contractor aiming at Seung-woo. Disarmed another with a kick that shattered his elbow. Her MPX clicked empty, and she transitioned to her sidearm without breaking stride. Each shot placed with surgical precision kneecaps, shoulders, anywhere that stopped threats without granting mercy through death. Dr. Chen was screaming orders, retreating toward an exit. Kang pulled his own weapon, swinging toward Seung-woo. Rachel crossed 15 meters in 3 seconds and hit him like a freight train, driving him into the ground. The firefight collapsed into a brutal stalemate. Rachel had neutralized 8 of the 12 contractors, but the survivors had found cover and regrouped with the disciplined efficiency of professionals who'd survived worse. Seung-woo crouched behind an engine block, reloading, while Rachel maintained suppressing fire from behind a concrete pillar. Kang had scrambled to safety near Dr. Reynes. Chen, his weapon trained on the shadows where Rachel moved like violent smoke. "Enough." Dr. Chen's voice cut through the gunfire, amplified by a megaphone one of her contractors handed her. "Asset 404, you're surrounded. Mr. Bay is bleeding out. Surrender now and I'll allow him medical attention. Continue this, and you both die in this warehouse." Rachel's eyes found Seung-woo across the kill box. He was favoring his left side where a round had punched through his plate carrier, blood darkening his shirt. But his expression carried the cold satisfaction of a man about to reveal a winning hand. "Kang!" Seung-woo called out, his voice echoing through the warehouse. "Before anyone else dies, I thought you should know I transferred the syndicate's liquid assets this morning. All 400 million. Moved it to an offshore charity that funds burn victim recovery and child welfare services." The silence that followed had weight. Kang emerged from cover, his face cycling through confusion, rage, and dawning horror. "You're lying. You wouldn't—" "The accounts you sold to Dr. Chen? Empty. The distribution networks? I've already sent termination orders to every lieutenant. The real estate holdings? Tied up in trusts that will take years to litigate." Seung-woo smiled, and it was the expression of a king burning his own castle rather than letting it be conquered. "You sold them a shell company, Kang. Congratulations on your 40 million. I hope it covers the debt you now owe to every supplier, every enforcer, every organization that's going to come looking for payment." Kang's weapon wavered, his world collapsing into the reality that he'd traded 15 years of protection for nothing but exposure and enemies. "You destroyed everything, your own empire." "It was never about the empire," Seung-woo said quietly. "It was about not letting you profit from betrayal." Dr. Chen's megaphone clattered to the concrete. "Asset 404, this changes nothing. You're still federal property. You were designed in our laboratories, trained with our resources, enhanced with our—" "I was a child." Rachel's voice cut through the darkness, cold and absolute. "You stole children and called it recruitment. You tortured us and called it training. You turned us into weapons and called it service." The handler thought she could own Rachel forever, thinking people are just property. If you're sick of corrupt systems and toxic leaders who think they own you, subscribe right now. Let's burn their system down together. Rachel pulled the detonator from her tactical vest, the one she'd spent the previous afternoon wiring throughout the warehouse, connecting it to the fuel drums and chemical storage containers that every port facility kept in convenient concentration. "Dr. Chen, you taught me that every asset needs an exit strategy. You also taught me that some exits require scorched earth." Her thumb hovered over the trigger. "You have 30 seconds to run." The contractors moved first, recognizing the voice of someone who'd calculated acceptable losses and found everyone present expendable. They bolted for the exits. Dr. Chen stood frozen, years of control evaporating into the reality that her greatest success had become her extinction event. 20 seconds, Rachel said. Dr. Chen ran. Kang followed, screaming threats that dissolved into the distance. Rachel counted down to 0, looked at Seung-woo, and pressed the button. The explosion registered on seismographs as far as San Diego. The fire burned for 3 days, hot enough to turn steel into slag and human remains into ash, indistinguishable from industrial residue. Federal investigators found fragments of 2 bodies in what had been the warehouse's central kill zone dental records matched to Seung-woo Bay and an unidentified female matching Rachel Harris's general description. The news cycle feasted on it for a week. Mafia boss dies in gangland inferno. Mystery woman identified as former government asset. Chimera protocol returns from the dead. Then newer tragedies replaced them, and they became another archive tragedy in a city that produced bodies faster than anyone could count them. Dr. Chen survived with 3rd-degree burns and a shattered pelvis. Kang Min-jae was found in a Tijuana motel 3 weeks later with a single gunshot wound that the Mexican authorities ruled a suicide. The Jiangmi syndicate collapsed into territorial war as ambitious lieutenants carved up the corpse of an empire with no king and no treasury. No one looked for ghosts in Bali. The surf shop sat on a stretch of beach in Canggu, where the tourists hadn't fully metastasized yet. All bleached wood and hand-painted signs advertising board rentals and coconut water. The owner was a Korean man in his 30s who'd let his hair grow long enough to tie back, whose neck tattoos made him popular with the backpackers looking for authentic edge with their Instagram photos. His partner was a black woman with box braids sunlightened to amber, who taught advanced classes and had a laugh that carried across the water when someone wiped out trying to show off. The locals knew them as Minho and Ray, a quiet couple who paid their taxes, donated to the village temple, and never talked about where they'd gotten the money to buy the shop outright. The tourists saw 2 people who'd found paradise and never looked back. Songwoo Minho now, the name he'd been born with before the dragon and the empire, stood in the shallows watching Rachel guide a teenager through her first successful cutback. She moved through the water with the same fluid precision she'd once used to dismantle trained killers, but now it was teaching mechanics and celebrating small victories. Her smile was real. Not the manufactured expression of someone playing a role, but the genuine article that came from a life where no one was tracking her biometrics or measuring her combat efficacy. She caught him watching and waved, her other hand steadying the student's board. The sun caught the water droplets on her skin and turned them into diamonds. No scars visible under the rash guard. No weapons except the dive knife every surfer carried for emergencies. That night they sat on their small porch, drinking bintang beer and watching the sky turn colors that didn't exist in Los Angeles. Rachel's head rested against his shoulder, her breathing steady and unguarded in a way that would have gotten her killed in her previous life. "Do you miss it?" she asked quietly. The empire, the power. Seung-woo thought about marble floors and men who feared his name, about the weight of a crown made from violence and respect. Then he looked at Rachel's face, finally peaceful after 26 years of war. "No," he said. "I miss nothing." They were no longer the boss and the asset. They were just 2 people who'd burned down their pasts and built something small and real from the ashes, free in a way that empires could never buy and institutions could never understand. The ocean kept its secrets, and they kept each other.